to the Crochet Magical Mystery Tour. I'm Chris of Light and Joy Designs, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make the crochet Inspira Cowl. This is the 35th project of the Crochet Magical Mystery Tour, which is a year-long crochet along where I present you with free patterns each week. There's also giveaways and yarn reviews and much more. So be sure to subscribe below and also check out the email alerts on my website. That's the details for that are in the description below. So let me show you this cowl. This cowl is based on the knit version called the Inspira Cowl, and it's been something that's been a favorite of mine for a long time, and I've wanted to make it in a crochet version. And I've tried lots of different ways, but I finally found a way that makes it and makes it look as beautiful as the knit version. So let me show you a little bit about these ones that I've made. So each of these is made in two different color changing yarns. It's good if you can have at least one of the color changing yarns be long color changes. So if you were to use two variegated yarns, it might look a little bit too busy. But as long as one of your color changing yarns has long stranding colors, let me show you an example. So for this one, I used Roll With It Melange in the colorway Hollywood. And you can see that the colors, they're somewhat long, but it's a little bit variegated. But what I did was I matched it up with Ferris Wheel, Lion Brand's Ferris Wheel yarn, which has very long and gradual color changes. Gradual color changes is probably more preferred than abrupt changes. For instance, some of the those yarn cakes that just go abruptly from one color to the next. This colorway is evergreen. So these two together create a really nice look. You could also use two colors that are both long color changing, and that's what this one is made in. This one is made in Ferris Wheel in Wild Violets. That's the pink part. And then the blue part was made with Lion Brand's Mandala Ombre yarn in the colorway Mantra. So that's, and both of those are long color changes and also gradual. They kind of, one color seeps into the next color. And then this last one here, is still in progress, and I think I'm going to make it just as a short version, just kind of as it is. Right now it is 5.5 inches tall, so I'll probably make it maybe just another inch taller and leave it as is, as just a straight cowl. These other ones, these measure, I believe, they are like around 11 inches tall. And so this one is made in Noro Silk Garden in the colorway number 432. This is a wool, silk, and mohair yarn. It's really nice. And then the other yarn that I use for this one is a long color changing, and then this one is the Lion Brand Amazing yarn, which although it is no longer being made, you can still get it in a lot of places online on like Etsy and eBay and other places. And this one is Aurora. It also has long color changing with a lot of variability. So that made a nice combination there. Something that's really fun about these cowls is not only do they look cool on this side, But unlike the knitted version, these are reversible and it has a completely different look on the other side. So when you turn it inside out, you have this really cool striped look going on. And so you almost get like two cowls in one when you make this pattern. It's just so pretty. Okay, so the materials you're going to need for this project. This pattern is made in worsted weight yarn, number 4 weight yarn. If you want to try and make this in another weight yarn, either lighter weight or bulky weight, you would have to redo all the numbers because the increases are not, they're not just like regular increases. They vary on each row. And so it's totally doable. You would just need to create a swatch and figure out your gauge and figure out your increases, because this is a 4-stitch repeat, so everything has to be divisible by 4. So anyways, this pattern calls for using worsted weight yarn. If you use worsted weight yarn and you follow the gauge, it will work out to the measurements that I have here for you. So you'll need 2 different yarns. You could use one solid and one color changing. You could use one solid and one variegated. But if you're using 2 color changing yarns, I would suggest that at least one of them be long, gradual color changes. The other one could be variegated, but having 2 with the long, gradual color changes would probably look the best. This calls for using a 6.0 millimeter hook. And of course, as usual, you'll need a yarn needle for sewing in your ends, scissors, and a measuring tape to check your gauge. So the amount of yarn that you'll need for this project, if you're using Ferris wheel yarn, again, this is a number 4 weight yarn. However, it is on the thinner side of number 4 weight yarn. So if you are using different yarns, you may need more or less yardage, but this will give you an idea. For if you're making the small version, you will need 1.5 or 1 1/4 skeins of Ferris wheel for color A, and for color B you would need 1 skein, and that works out to about for color A 300 to 350 yards. 1 skein is 270 yards. That's for color B. And actually I didn't even use the whole skein, so you probably wouldn't even need that full 270. If you're making the large version, which is about 10 or 15% larger, you are going to need 2 skeins of each of the Ferris wheel for color A and B, which would be approximately 350 to 400 yards. And these are conservative, so you might not need quite that much, but just have that on hand to be on the safe side. 350 to 400 yards, and for color B, 300 to 350 yards. Again, if you're going to make this in a different yarn than Ferris wheel, you should make a swatch and measure your gauge, and then do the math to figure out exactly how much yardage you will need. This will give you a good guideline, but it could be a little bit more or less than this depending on whether your yarn is thinner or thicker. Okay, so I find that when I know where I'm going with a pattern, it makes it a lot easier to conceptualize the very beginning of it. So let's take a a really high level overview of how this pattern works. I'm going to show you how to make both a small one, small/medium size, and also if you need to make a larger version, I have a larger version as well. So the small/medium size, which is these ones that I showed you, they're still pretty big. So they have a 22-inch circumference at the neck, and at the bottom it grows all the way to 46-inch circumference at the bottom edge. From top to bottom, it's about 11 to 12 inches tall, depending on how stretchy your yarn is. You're going to start with 80 stitches, and there's going to be 4 rows where we increase. On the first one, you're going to increase every 2 stitches. On the second increase, in this section here, you're going to increase every 5 stitches. The fourth increase is going to be every 6 stitches, and the last increase row is going to be every 14 stitches. So your stitch count will go from 80 stitches around to 120 stitches around, 144 stitches around, 168, and finally you end up with 180 stitches in the last section. For the large version, the measurements are going to be 25 inches around at the top and 50 inches around at the bottom. On both of these, both the small and the large, once you get to this stage, it is finished, but it is wide enough to cover your shoulders, and so at that stage you can actually keep going if you want to make it into a poncho. So for the large, if you want to take a screenshot of this, 25 inches circumference at the top, it's going to be also 11 to 12 inches tall, and you're going to start with 108 stitches. You are going to work what I call 2 sections, and I'll show you that in the next piece. But the first increase row is going to be every 3 stitches. You're going to increase by 1. The next increase row, you're going to increase every 6 stitches by 1. So, like, in other words, every time there's an increase, you, instead of doing 1 stitch, you do 2 stitches. So the first one is every 3 stitches, every 6, every 14, and every 9 stitches. And I'm going to be showing that to you, how that works. Your stitch count goes from 108, increases along the way till at the end you will be at 200 stitches. So let's take a look at the sections now. Okay, if we take a look at the cowl, you can see that we have it's in sections, and we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sections. In between each of these sections, we have a row of solid color. Those are where the increases will happen. So those solid color sections happen. Of course, you have your first, your beginning chain, but I'm not going to count that. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 solid sections, and I've labeled those A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And there are going to be 4 of those sections, those solid color sections, where we will have those increases. That's the places where you're going to be increasing your stitch count. And every time you do an increase, instead of doing 1 stitch, you're going to be doing 2 stitches. And this is how frequently those stitch increases will occur. And I'm going to show you how that works. I'm just giving you the overview right now. So the way that this pattern works is it's a 4 stitch repeat. So let's take a look at that a little closer. The cowl is worked from the top all the way down, and it's worked in this way. It's color A, which in this case is green, or actually color A in this case is pink, because we start with pink, and it goes 2 pink, 2 green, then it would be 2 pink, 2 green, 2 pink, 2 green. It just this 4 stitch repeat, this 4 stitch pattern repeats. Then you have a single row with just your color A. Then when you go to the next section, you are going to switch the colors. So instead of going pink green, it's going to go green pink. Then we have a solid color of your color A, and then we switch back again. And when you get to, you work 3 sections before you have your first increase. So at the solid color, that would be row C. That's where you're going to have your first increase, and that's going to be every 2 stitches you're going to do 2 stitches into 1 stitch. When you get to row D, you're going to do 2 stitches into 1 stitch every 5 stitches. And actually for this, for these purposes, if it's helpful to you, you can use stitch markers. I didn't use them, but it might be helpful. So if that's the case, you would need, you know, a good bunch of stitch markers, and then so on down the line. So in these solid color rows, you are going to have increases. So let's take a look now at the pattern chart. Okay, so let's take a look at how this pattern, the stitch pattern, works. If you are making the small, you're going to chain 80, and if you're making the large, you're going to chain 108. We're going to start off with our chain, and our pattern is in multiples of 4, so I'm going to demonstrate this with 8 stitches. So we're going to have So you'll be starting here, you'll be chaining along in multiples of 4, and you'll go all the way around until your last chain, and then you will join with a slip stitch, and this will be either 80 or 108. For row 1, you are going to chain 3 and then do a double crochet in the next chain. To get the nicest look, you'll want to go into the back bump of that chain, which I will show you. But if that's not comfortable for you, you can go into any portion of the chain that you prefer. As long as you are consistent, that's fine. So then we skip 2 chains. We chain 2, skip 2, and then we do another 2 double crochets. Then we chain 2, skip 2, and do another 2 double crochets. This chain 3 counts as a double crochet. And you go in this pattern all the way around until your last 2 double crochets and a chain 2, and then you join with a slip stitch to the top of the 3rd starting chain. So that's the first pass of row 1. Every row has 2 passes, one in color A and the second in color B. So then we're going to go and we're going to do the second pass of row 1. We're going to join our yarn here to this first open chain, and we're going to chain 3. Each of the successive passes is worked in front of the work that's already been worked, and you'll see that when I demonstrate it. So we have a chain 3, then we're going to do a double crochet into the next chain, then we're going to chain 2. This is going to happen basically in front of these stitches, and then you're going to do 2 double crochets and then chain 2. And all of these green stitches, or color B, are going to be in front of the color A stitches. You're going to go all the way around. You're going to have 2 double crochets, chain 2, 2 double crochets, chain 2, and then you're going to join with a slip stitch to this chain 3. And that is row 1 completed. Then we're going to move on to row 2. For the first section, all the sections are 3 rows, and each row has 2 passes. For the first section, we always start every row with color A. In the subsequent sections, we'll always be starting with color B, and you'll see that later. So now we're ready for row 2. And we're going to start with color A. We're going to start where we left off right here. And what we're going to do is we are going to chain 2 to get us up to the height that we need. And then we are going to do a front post double crochet around this chain 3 here. Then we're going to do another front post double crochet around this double crochet. Then we're going to chain 2, and we're going to do a front post double crochet and a front post double crochet, chain 2. We're going to go all the way around like we did before. We'll have our last 2 front post double crochets, chain 2, and then we will join with a slip stitch into our first front post double crochet. Now we're ready for the second pass of row 2. Come to where we finish with the slip stitch here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to chain 2 to get up to our height of a double crochet, and then we're going to do a front post double crochet into that chain 3 and a front post double crochet into this double crochet below. We're going to chain 2 and then front post double crochet, front post double crochet, chain 2, all the way around. Again, front post double crochet, chain 2, front post double crochet, and then we have a chain 2, and then we join with a slip stitch to the top of this first front post double crochet. Row 3 is worked exactly the same as row 2. You're just going to repeat row 2. So for row 3, we're going to start with the pink again. We're going to chain 2. We're going to do our front post double crochet into this one, into this front post double crochet. We do front post double crochet into this one, front post double crochet into these two, chain 2, all the way back around, front post double crochet into these two, and we join with a slip stitch to the top of the first front post double crochet. Then we go to our green, or color B, go to where our slip stitch was. We're going to chain up 2, and we're going to do the same pattern again. All the way around. You're going to have 2 more front post double crochets, chain 2, chain 2, and we're going to join with a slip stitch here. So when you look at this pattern, just like this, it's really kind of overwhelming to look at, and that's why I like to draw it out for you so you can watch it as it emerges. You can go back to this little section here to look at it again and again. So then we have a lettered row, and I'm just going to call it row A because that's the first one, or round, it's rounds. And round, these lettered rounds, let's actually put it into the color that it's going to be in. Oops. Cut. And we're going to have round A. And with round A, what we're going to do is we're just going to work only color A. So all of these lettered rounds, A, B, C, and so on, are worked in just color A. So these are really easy, and the first 2, there's no increases, and then the next 4 is where we do our increases, and then the last one, there's no increase. So to do this row, we're just going to chain up 2, and we're just going to do front post double crochets all the way around into the double crochet in the previous row. So normally when we draw these, you put this little hook down below so that you know it goes into this one here, but I'm just drawing it above so that it's easy, and you just keep going. All the way around. And then you just continue. And then we join with a slip stitch to the top of our first front post double crochet. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we start the next section, section 2, and how we'll restart every section thereafter. What you're going to do is you're going to want your color A to now be lined up on top of color B and vice versa. So we're just going to be switching, we're just going to be moving the yarns, one yarn this way and the other yarn that way. So you can see that our yarn is here, and in order to get it where we want to go, we're going to slip stitch forward 2 stitches. One, two, and then we will be lined up on top of this one here and ready to go. The green one, or the color B, we're going to slip stitch backwards. Whoops, let me undo that. We're going to slip stitch backwards. I'm just going to show it in black. We're going to slip stitch backwards, and this one we're going to slip stitch forwards. And then that's going to put our green here. And since we just finished with pink, our first pass of row 4 is going to be with our green yarn. So since we have slip stitched back to here, we're basically going to, from here we're going to chain 2, and you may actually need to chain a 3rd chain, and then you will begin with a front post double crochet into this front post double crochet, and then another front post double crochet into this one. We're going to skip 2, chain 2, front post double crochet, front post double crochet, chain 2, and so on. And then you'll come around and you will be going into these 2, chain 2, and join with a slip stitch here. Then you'll be ready to move on to color A for your second pass of row 4. We have slip stitched our yarn over to here, so we're going to chain up 2, and then we are going to front post double crochet 2 times, chain 2, front post double crochet, chain 2, and so on. And that will, it'll come back around here, chain 2, and you will finish with a slip stitch right here in the top of your first color A front post double crochet. And then row 5 and 6, oops, row 5 and row 6 will just be repeating row 2. Okay, and then when you get to row B, you're just going to be repeating row A. When you get to rows C, D, E, and F, you'll be making increases, which I will show you. I'm going to walk you through those. And the way that they work is you know the number of stitches. You have your your interval. And every 2 stitches you're going to increase by 1 on row C. On row D, it's going to be every 5 stitches. On the 5th stitch, you're going to increase by 1 stitch. Basically, you're just going to do 2 stitches into that 1 stitch. And that would be, those will be front post double crochets as well, and I'll show you that. So let's take a look at how that looks with our yarn and hook. Okay, so for this, the one that I'm going to make today, I'm using Ferris wheel in Cotton Candy and Wild Violets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with I'm going to have the pink be my color A, and I'm just going to chain 80. And to start that off, we're going to do a slip stitch. And this is how I make it. I just make a loop, and then I just pull the working yarn up through that loop. And just pull it tight. Oops, I actually did that wrong. This is my working yarn. I'm going to pull that up through the bottom and put it on my hook. All right, so to chain, we're just going to yarn over and pull through the hook. Pull through the loop that's on your hook. You're just going to do that 80 times. Okay, so I have my 80 chains. I'm going to go down the chain, making sure that I don't twist it. And then when I get to that first one, I am just going to go into that chain. Now, when you're deciding which thread to go into, you can go into any of them. You can go into one of the front 2 V threads, or you can go into the 3rd back bump thread. You can see those bumps right there. Whichever you choose, just be consistent. And I'm going to use the back bump because it gives a little bit more of a finished look on the edge. So, but whatever you're most comfortable with is fine. So I've gone into that chain. I'm going to yarn over, pull through a loop, and then pull that pull that loop through the loop that's on my hook. And that is a slip stitch. So now we have our circle. So according to our chart, we are going to start by chain 3, and then we're going to do a double crochet into the very next chain. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go right to the next chain. You can see that back bump right there, and I'm going to do a double crochet. And to do that, we're going to yarn over, and go into that back bump, yarn over, pull up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Then we're going to chain 2. 1, 2. I'm going to skip 2 chains, and then I'm going to do 2 double crochet. I'm going to do a double crochet in each of the next 2 chains. So so there's 1, there's 2, and here's 3. So I'm going to do a double crochet into that, yarn over. I'm going into the back bump, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. I'm going to do another one right into the next back bump. Yarn over, pull up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And this will feel very fiddly, very uncomfortable, maybe might make you feel a little bit of crochet stress. Most projects I have found are like this in the very beginning. Don't worry about it, just keep going. So you're just going to continue in this pattern, chain 2, skip 2 chains, and do a double crochet into each of the next 2 chains. So just continue with that all the way around, and I will meet you at the end of the row where I'll show you how we join it up. Okay, so I finished my last 2 double crochets in color A. I'm going to do 2 more chains, and I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the 3rd chain of our starting chain. So I did my chain 2. I'm going to count up 1, 2, 3. That's where I'm going to go in and do a slip stitch. So I just yarn over, pull through a loop, and pull it through the loop on my hook. So now we are done with the first half of row 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chain 1, 2, 3, 4, doesn't matter, and I'm just going to pull through a big loop so I don't pull that out. You could also use a stitch marker to secure that. And now I'm going to start with my color B. This is Cotton Candy Ferris wheel yarn. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a slip knot and pull that tight on the hook. Actually, I might make the tail just a little bit longer. Okay. So now let's take a look at where we're going to be joining the green. These were our first 2 double crochets, the chain 3 and the double crochet. We're going to go into this first empty chain, and that's where we're going to add in our color B, in this case the green. I'm going to go right into that chain. Let's take a look at that. And I've been working into the back bumps. And sorry that this yarn is it's a little bit hard to see. But this is the first back bump right here. And this one right here is the second back bump. So I'm going to go into this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into that first back bump, and you might have to just kind of pull it up with your fingers to get in there if you've done your chains a little too tight like I did. And then I'm going to take that loop and I'm just going to pull it through, and I'm going to make my first chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to go into the next back bump right here. Let me just pull that up a little bit. I'm going to make a double crochet, yarn over, and go into that chain. And you might be not worrying about back bumps or whatever. You just go into whatever part of the chain that you can get into. It doesn't matter. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop. Now I have 3 loops on my hook. I'm going to yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, so that's this one. Now I'm going to chain 2, and then I'm going to go into, I'm going to do double crochet into the next 2 empty chains. Just going to pull this tail through here, get it out of the way. So now we chain 2, 1, 2, and again it will feel a little fiddly in the beginning. Don't worry, it gets so much easier. This pattern is actually very easy once you get past the first row. So I did a chain 2. Now I'm going to go to the next 2 empty chains, 1, 2, and I'm going to do a double crochet into each of those. And the key here is you're keeping your work in front of the first part of that row, in front of your color A. So yarn over, pull through a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. I'm going to do that again into this next chain. And again, it's just this first row that's a little slow. 1, 2, and I'm just going to do that all the way around to the end. Just remember to keep your yarn for color B in front of the color A. And then chain 2. And so on. So just do that all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end for how we join it up. Okay, so I've done my last, let's see where we are here. I've done my last 2 double crochets. I've done my chain 2, and now I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the 3rd chain, 3rd starting chain. So that's right here. So we count 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go into that chain, pull up my work, yarn over, pull through a loop, and then pull that loop through the loop on my hook. Now I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the pink, is I'm just going to chain up 4 and pull that loop all the way through. And again, you can use a stitch marker if you want to secure that, especially if you're putting your work aside. I use stitch markers when I'm done with it for the day. Oops, look what I did. I skipped 2. So let's just go back. I had 2 left. Let's redo those 2 chains. 1, 2. Okay, so now I have 2 more double crochets to do here in these last 2 stitches before where our pink row ended, or color A. That's 1, and 2. Okay, now chain 2 and join with a slip stitch, 1, 2, 3. There we go. I'm going to chain 4 and just pull that through. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our pink, and what I'm going to do is there's a little bit of an art to the yarn management in this project. So for the next row, I'm going to take out two of those chains, or let's just go back down to where we started. Okay. To start this next row, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this yarn out of the way. I'm just going to pull it down here. I'm just going to, actually, this is, I'm going to end up going in front of, or going around this. So we're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and now I'm going to do a front post double crochet in each of these 2 color A double crochets. So the way we do that is we yarn over, go in from the right around the back and out through the left hand side of that post of that double crochet. I'm going to yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So let's do that again. Yarn over, go behind the post from right to left, yarn over, pull up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And now I'm going to chain 2. 1, 2. So what I'm going to, I've just chained 2, and this work here from the color B, I am just going to pull it off to the side. I'm just going to move my ball of yarn over here and just move that out of the way, because I'm going to be working along the front of the yarn, along the front of the project each time I'm working with a particular color. So I've chained 2. Now I'm going to do another 2 front post double crochets. Go around that post from right to left, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, those are front post double crochets. Chain 2, and just keep repeating that. Just go around the post and you just do a double crochet around the post instead of into the stitch. And you're just going to do that all the way around to the end. All right, so I've done a chain 2. I've got 2 more front post double crochets left. 1, 2, chain 2, and we're just going to join up to that first front post double crochet. So I'm just going to go under those 2 threads there and do a slip stitch. Yarn over, pull through a loop, and pull through the loop on my hook. I'm going to chain 4. It's just my process, and put that off to the side. All right, so that is basically row 1 completed of our first section. So this is a section, so it's actually comprised of 3 rows. Then we have a solid color line, then another section which is 3 rows, a solid color line, another section with 3 rows, another solid color line. So, oh, I was totally wrong there. This is the first part of row 2 completed. This is the first part of row 2 completed. So now we're going to do the second part of row 2 in our color B. So again, I'm going to take my color A yarn. I'm just going to pull it down below and off to the side so that I don't have to keep switching the balls of yarn. I'm going to come back to my chains where I left off, and we are going to, for the next row, we're going to start with a chain 2, and then we're going to do a front post double crochet into that first chain 3, front post double crochet into the next one, and so on, and just work the same way that we worked the A row, the pink row, color A. So I have 4 chains here. I'm just going to pull out 2. 1, 2. And if you are not sure, just go back down to the starting chain and chain 2. Okay, so there's our chain 2. And now I'm going to front post double crochet in that chain 3 from row 1. And also in the next one, yarn over, go through that post, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and we're always working in the front of the work, in front of the last row that was worked. Chain 2, go into the next color B, chain 2, and so on. So just do that all the way around. I'll meet you at the end for finishing up row 2, the second half of row 2. Okay, so I have 2 double crochets left. I've done my chain 2. One. Remember to keep all that other work behind your current row. Chain 2, and I'm just going to join it up to that first double crochet right there, right underneath those 2, that V there. Yarn over, pull through a loop, and pull that loop through the loop on my hook. That's a slip stitch. Okay, so that is row 2 finally completed, both the color A and color B. So what you're going to do is do one more of those, do one more of that row, starting with the pink and then the green, or color A and then color B. And then I'll meet you back here for doing the solid color row. Okay, before you go on to do your row 3, I just want to remind you that as you do each of your rows, to set up your yarn, get your working yarn of whatever color you're working with, make sure that that's in the front. Okay, so we just worked with green. I'm getting it to the back. Sometimes you might need to twirl your piece around to get your current working yarn in the front. So I just want to get that out of the way, and then I can begin my color A. Okay, so I'm halfway through row 3, and I just want to show you. So I just finished the pink, and now I need to work with the green, and I want to make sure that the pink is out of the way. So one thing that I can do is you can see the pink is still on top of the green. So what I can do is I can just take my piece, turn it around one time, and now the green is on top. So as you go through each row, just turn it. So when I go back to the pink, I'll turn it back this way. When I go back to the green, I'll turn it around this way. Just revolve it around one time, and that'll bring the other yarn on top. This way you're not having to move your yarn balls back and forth. So I have just finished the second half of row 3, and now we're ready to start on our solid color row, or to use this chart here, we've just finished the 3 rows of this section, and now we're on row A, and there won't be any increases in this row. So this one's actually very easy. We're just going to get our color A, and we want that to be in the front. Actually, I just ended up moving my other ball of yarn. All right. And we're just going to work front post double crochets all the way around. So I'm going to take out 1, 2. So you start with a chain 2. Again, always working in the front of your work, in front of whatever that last row was. I'm going to yarn over and do a front post double crochet, and another one, and another one. I'm just going to work these all the way around this row. All right, so just work that color A all the way around in front post double crochet. I have finished my row, I guess I'm calling this row A. Here it is. So I just finished this row A, and I'm about to begin the second section. So it'll be another 3 rows, but we're going to be reversing the color A and B. So I'm just going to finish up with a slip stitch of the pink, or color A, and I'm going to chain 4 just to get this secured. And I'm going to pull that loop through. And now, so when we were working the first section, rows 1, 2, and 3, we were always starting with pink and then green, or color A started the row and color B finished the row. Since we just worked a row in color A, and we're going to be switching things, for this next section, each of the 3 rows is going to start with color B. So what we're going to do is, I'll show you on this diagram here. So in the back we have the color B, because we always have to switch back and forth between the colors. So since this row was a color A, we need to go to color B next. And you can see our stripes developing on the inside, which is cool. So what I want to do is I want to get this yarn to be on top of color A. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to slip stitch back 2 stitches. I'm going to take these chains out, and I'm going to slip stitch back 1, 2 stitches so that my yarn is going to start here. So this is where we left off here with the green with a slip stitch. What I'm actually doing now is I'm going to slip stitch backwards over these 2 chains, and then I'm going to start with a chain 2 you know, from here. And then I'm going to start my front post double crochets, chain 2, like so. Okay, chain 2. And then for our pink, I'll show you that when we get to that. So let's do that here. So I'm going to pull out these chains, come to this stitch, and I'm just going to work from the back, and I'm just going to go into this first chain and slip stitch, and then I'm just going to go into this next chain and slip stitch. And that just brings me back to the position I want to be in. So now I'm going to chain 1, 2, and I'm just going to turn my work around so that my green is on top. My green yarn is on top. So we've done I slip stitch back 2, chain 2, and now I'm ready to start my front post double crochet into the pink. So I'm going to yarn over, go right into that one, and it lines up with this pink here from the first section. And a second one, chain 2, skip 2, and front post double crochet in those next 2, chain 2, skip 2, front post double crochet, and so on, all the way around. And I'll meet you at the end of this row. All right, I am at the end of another row 1 of section 2 with color B. So that's the first half of row 1. I'm going to do a slip stitch. I'll chain my 4, get that out of the way. And now I'm ready to work with color B. And what I need to do here is now I need to get, if you recall, we finished over here. And I need to get here. So just like with the green where I did a slip stitch backwards, with the pink, I'm just going to slip stitch forward 2 stitches so that I can start here. So I'm here, I'm going to slip stitch here, here, and then I'm going to chain 3. Actually, I'm going to chain 2. Sorry, chain 2, and then I'm going to do my front post double crochet, front post double crochet, and you can see that that's lining up with the green now, which is what we want. So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to pull these out. And I'm actually just going to take that loop. I'm going to go underneath the blue here. And these 2 stitches here, I'm just going to slip stitch into those. So here's 1. One, 2, And now I am ready to begin my work so that it's going to, actually, I need to go over one more, this one here. There we go. Okay, I am in the right spot. So we're just going to chain 2. 1, 2, and then I'm going to do a front post double crochet into this one here. 1, 2. All right, and now we're back to our alternating pattern. So I'm going to chain 2, and then I'm going to go into these next two. I'm going to skip 2 stitches and do front post double crochet into the next 2, and chain 2, and just kind of repeat that all the way around. And the way that, you know, if you ever want to check if you're on the right path, basically your colors have switched now. So your green is now lining up with the pinks, and your pinks are lining up with the greens. So you're going to work that around, and then you're just going to do 2 more of those rows. So for a total of, so each of these are sections. All right, section 1, 2, 3. This was one section here. We worked that. That was actually 3 rows. 1, 2, 3. We've done row A, and now we're going to do another 3 rows. 1, 2, and 3 of section 2. And I will meet you back here for row B. I just finished the second half of row 1 in my second section, and I wanted to point a couple of things out to you. One is it's possible that as you're going along that you kind of lose track of how many rows you've done in that current section. You're not sure, and there's a real easy way to check that, and that is by turning your work to the inside. And if you look for the last row that was all pink, you know, the row A, so that's this one here. I can see it there. So that's row A, and then I can see it here on the back. So that gives me kind of a place to look from. So because of that, now I can see that I've worked 1, 2 lines, and it takes 2 lines to make up a whole row because it's made up of 2 alternating colors. All right, so that means if I lost my place and I'm not sure, maybe I came back to my work and I'm not sure where I'm at, all I have to do is look for that solid line in the back. There it is, and figure out how many additional lines have been worked since then. And remember, for every 2 lines, that's considered 1 row. So that's how you can check. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention to you that I neglected to mention before is that all of these charts will be in the written pattern. There will be, this pattern will be on my blog for free. It'll just be written out in words. So on there you can get it totally free. But all the charts and diagrams and so on will be in the written pattern. And right now my written patterns are just $2.25. That'll be available on Ravelry, Etsy, Lovecrafts, you know, wherever it's available, I'll have a link to it in the description below. So just continue on and work 2 more rows to complete this second section. And remember that each row you go around once with one color and once with the other color. Okay, and I'll meet you back for the next solid row, row B. Okay, so I have just finished the second half of the 3rd row of my section 2, because remember each of the sections is 3 rows, and of course each row has 2 passes, one with color A and one with color B. So I just finished my second section and I'm ready to do a row B, which is going to be all solid color A. And I'm at a point in my color changing yarn where my pink has turned into brown. So this row is going to be all this color brown here. So for row B, I'm just going to chain 2, and I'm just going to start right on that first double crochet and do a front post double crochet in every stitch all the way around. Okay, so that's going to be row B. No increases yet, just front post double crochet all the way around. And I will meet you at the end to show you how to start the 3rd section, section 3. So I've just finished row B, a solid row, and now I'm going to do another section, section 3, same as section 1 and 2, except we're going to switch back now. We're going to switch the color A and color B. So we're going to start with color B next. That's this one here. And let me just chain this so that I don't pull through a loop. Okay, so we're going to want this to line up with green again. We want it to line up with green again. So, because this one goes from, does green and purple. All right, so, and we want to keep our inside this, what would we call this? The joining parts. We want to keep that in one line. So what we're going to do is I'm going to work this stitch forward this way. Oops, sorry. I'm going to work it forward this way so that it's coming up here, and then this one I'm going to slip stitch backwards. So I'm just going to slip stitch this one backwards first, actually. Color A. One, two, and that should be, yep, that's going to be lined up here. That's where I want it. So now I'm going to do my chain 4 and just pull that through, just hold that off to the side. And the color B, so we moved color A over 2 spaces this way. I'm going to move color B over 2 spaces this way using slip stitch. So I'm just going to pull out these chains. Sometimes the yarn gets caught on itself. All right. So I'm going to grab that loop, and I'm just going to slip stitch over 2. 1, and let me make sure that I'm going into the next one, which is this one here. Oops, sorry. 2. All right, and that should be lined up with our original green. Yep, with our original color B. So now I'm going to chain 1, 2, and I'm ready to start my first row with color B. And before I do that, I want to make sure that my yarns are not twisted. Okay, so I'm just going to get the pink out of the way. I'm going to pull it under my work. There we go. And I want to make sure that this is color B, so this is color B. It needs to line up with these two here. So I'm going to follow it all the way up to this one here, and that's where I'm going to start my first front post double crochet. And actually, I'm going to do a 3rd chain, because since we did do 2 rows of color A in a row, I kind of need just a little extra height to get this stitch started. And another front post double crochet in the next one. Chain 2. You know the drill. Front post double crochet, front post double crochet, chain 2, skip 2, 1, 2, front post double crochet, front post double crochet. All right, so just do that all the way across, and then of course your color A is going to be ready to go. So you're just going to do 3 rows for your section C, and of course, as a reminder, each row is made up of 2 passes, one in color B and then one in color A. And then I will meet you back when we're ready to do row C, which is going to be an increase row. All right, I'll meet you back here for that. I have finished section 3. I've done 3 rows in section 3. And so now we are at row C. And in row C, we are going to do an increase row. So on every 2 stitches, so every other stitch, we are going to increase by 1. That means we're going to do 2 stitches into 1 stitch every other stitch. And it's going to just be in color A, just in our color A. So I just finished with color B, and now we're ready to do color A. So let's take a look at that.
Now you may have noticed that I actually made an error here. I wasn't finished with section 3 because I still needed to complete my color A pass for that 3rd round of section 3. Since we always start each round with color B, we have to finish with color A. So I missed that row. But this pattern is very forgiving and it doesn't show it all. but I did want to point this out to you in case you noticed it and wondered why that happened. So now we can go on to round C.
So as always, we're going to start with chain 2. And I'm going to start with a front post double crochet in this first stitch. And in the next stitch, I'm going to do 2. So there's 1. And into that same stitch, I do a second one. And again, 1. And then 2. And also, I just want to show you again, in case you were, in case you get lost on where you're at, if you want to double check, did we finish our section? We can go back to where our last solid row was. And at this point, you're going to start seeing a little space in between where your solid row started and your section, and then where your section started. So this one here was our solid row, right here. And then here's our rows in section 3. We've got 1, 2, so that's one row. 1, 2 is another row, and 1, 2 is the third row. Okay, so what we're going to do is just continue in this manner of doing 1 stitch, all front post double crochets, 1 stitch in one, and then 2 stitches into the next one. So do that all the way around, and at the end we will have 120 stitches because we're going to increase the number of stitches by 40. So I'll meet you at the end. Okay, so I've finished the end of my row C, and now it's time to start our next section, section 4. And we are going to once again reverse our color A and B. And since we've done an increase, the rows are not going to line up perfectly anymore, but it won't be noticeable it won't be noticeable. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing that we did before, is we're just going to switch our colors by slip stitching 2 stitches. So I'm going to move my color A that I just finished with over 2 stitches. 1, 2, and I'm going to chain up 4 and pull through a loop. And then with my color B, pull out my chains. And I'm just going to slip stitch backwards 2 stitches. So let me just get that loop on my hook. And I'm just going to slip stitch backwards 2 stitches. So going into this chain here. There we go. So 1, and then And then I'll just chain up my, because we're going to be starting with, for this next row, so in section 4 we're going to be doing 3 rows. We're going to be starting with color B. So we're going to chain up 2 stitches, and we're going to start on this one right here, because we had been over here, and now we moved back over to this side, so we're no longer going to be lined up with our color B. Now we're going to line up on top of our color A from the previous row. We're just going to start with a front post double crochet, and here's where you're going to have to be really careful, is make sure that you don't go around these 2 stitches. So front post double crochet here, chain 2. So there's a double stitch there, so we're going to skip 1, 2, and then we're going to go into this next stitch with our front post double crochet. Oops. Something got stuck there. And then a second front post double crochet in the next stitch, chain 2, skip 2, 1, 2. So always make sure that, since we just had an increase row, make sure that you're pulling apart those double stitches to make sure that you're getting into the right stitch. So I skip 2, I go into this next one here. Chain 2. So I'm just going to keep going in that manner all the way around, and then when you're done, you're going to start with, you'll join with a slip stitch just like as always, and then you're going to do your color A for that row 1, and you're going to do that for a total of 3 rows. And remember that each row is comprised of 2 passes, one in color B and then the second in color A. So you're going to do essentially 6 passes to make those 3 rows, and then I'll meet you back here after you're done with section 4. I'll meet you back here for row D, where we're going to increase every 5 stitches. And if you're doing the large version, you'll be increasing every 6 stitches. Okay, so we'll meet you back there then. Okay, so I have just finished section 4. I did row C, where I increased every 2nd stitch. I've done 3 rows in section 4, and now we are at row D, where if you're making the small, you're going to increase every 5 stitches, and if you're making the large, you're going to increase every 6 stitches. So on the diagram here, there's actually an extra, this is actually row A, and this is B, and this is C. So I've done this section here, and now I'm ready to do row D. This is where we're at on the cowl. So for this row, row D, on every 5th stitch, I'm going to do 2 stitches. So you can either just count them out as you go, or you can count them out ahead of time and put a stitch marker in each of the ones you're going to have an increase in. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. So that's up to you whether you trust your counting or not. If you don't, like, one of the things you can do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is as you're going along, if you lose track of where you're at, you can always just go back to, oops, sorry about that, shaking. You can always go back, travel back and find the place where you did the last 2 stitches and then recount. So with 5, it's not that hard, so, but that's up to you. So what we're going to do is the same as before. We're going to work with our color A, and we chain up 2. Actually, since we just did a color A row, if you want, you can chain up just 1 is probably sufficient, but chaining up 2 is fine too. So we're going to just do a front post double crochet in all of these stitches around. And every time I get to a 5th stitch, I'm going to work 2 front post double crochets into that same stitch. So that's 1 and then 2. And then my counting starts all over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and here we are at the 5th one, and I'm going to do 2. 1 and 2. And sometimes I'm like, oh, did I do 2 at the last one? You can always just go back and check. And it really doesn't hurt at all to check your work as you go along, like recount 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we got 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we got 2, and so on. Every so often just check your last few segments to make sure that you're on track, and then you won't have to do any major frogging, which actually when I did my increase row down here, actually it was the next row up that I was off on. So it always pays to check as you go along. So I'll meet you back here when we start section 5, okay? Because right now we're doing D. I'm at the last stitch, and your last stitch should be an increased stitch. And luckily, mine worked out. I kept checking along the way, just checking the last few sections, and it's really a lifesaver to keep you on track. So with that one, now we're just going to slip stitch to the first double crochet here. And I'm just going to chain 4 and pull through a loop to hold that stitch. And now we're going to get ready to do our next section. So we just did row D, and our new stitch count will be 168 stitches if you're doing the small medium size cowl. If you are doing the large, this is A, B, C, and D, you will be at 180 stitches. So we are ready to start our next section. So we've done these ones. We're ready to start section 5. And we're going to do the same thing that we did before in terms of switching from starting, switching which color we start with. So, or actually switching the location of where that starting color is going to be, because we are going to start with color B since we just worked in color A. So we want this color B not to be lined up with where it was lined up before. We're going to want it to be lined up with where color A was before. And I want to keep my inside seam all in one line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip stitch my color B in this direction, and I'm going to slip stitch my color A in this direction. So each time you do an increase row, you're going to do that. You're going to slip stitch over in the opposite direction that you went the last time. So let's do that here with color B. Just going down to my first loop here. And I'm going to go into this next stitch here and slip stitch. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch here. And slip stitch there. And I'm going to chain up 1, 2, and I'm actually going to chain up 3 so that it will so that it rises up above the level of this last row. And we're just going to begin with our section pattern, which is of course just our 2 front post double crochets, 1, 2, and then chain 2, skip 2 stitches, and then 2 front post double crochets, chain 2, skip 2, and then skip 2, and then 2 front post double crochets. Oops, let me get some more yarn out here. And the main thing to watch out for when you're working this first row after an increase row is make sure that you are pulling apart those increases, that you don't miss one of them as you go along, or else you'll have to go back and redo your work. So just keep an eye out for that. So there's 1, 2, and then I come in here. So just watch out for that, and you're just going to work another whole section. It's going to be section 5, and you're just going to work it the same way you worked the other section, where you work 3 rows, and of course each row is comprised of 2 passes, a pass in color B and then a pass in color A. I will meet you for the color A one just to show you the the slip stitching back. All right. I've just finished the first pass of the first row of section 5. I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the first front post double crochet. I'm going to chain 4 and pull through that loop, and of course you can use a stitch marker to hold that if you like. And now we need to get our color A lined up over here. So I'm going to take out these chains. First of all, I'm just going to move this yarn out of the way, and I'll take out these chains carefully. Go into this one, and I'm just going to work backwards with a slip stitch 2 stitches. So there's 1 and there's 2, and I'm going to chain up 1, 2, turn this back around and make sure I'm lined up where I want to be. And yes, I am. I'm lined up over this stitch here, which is where I want to be. That's where I'm going to be starting. And this is color A, and we want it to be opposite of this color, which is color B, so we are in the right spot. So now I can begin with my front post double crochets right here. One, 2, and chain 2. I'm going to move this yarn out of the way behind here, because we always want to be working in the front of our work. So I've chained 2, and now I'm going to go to the next 2 stitches and do my front post double crochets. 1, 2, and chain 2. Get some more yarn out. And then we skip over 2 and go to the next 2. So you will continue with this all the way around to finish up row 1 of section 5, and then you'll complete 2 more of these rows. And I know that for some of you, you may not need this reminder, but some of you might, so I'm just going to remind you again that each row consists of 2 passes. The first pass in this row is color B, and the second pass is always color A for this section. So continue with that, and I will meet you back here when section 5 is completed, and we'll be ready to do row or round E, where we will have another increase row. Okay, so I have just finished section 5. I worked my 3 rows, 1, 2, 3. Now I'm ready to work row E, where we're going to increase 1 stitch every 6 stitches for the small / medium size cowl, and you're going to increase 1 stitch every 14 stitches for the large cowl. So let's take a look at that, and we're going to be working it in our color A. Okay, so we are working row E. We're going to increase every we're going to increase 1 stitch every 6 stitches, or if you're working the large, it'll be every 14 stitches. And again, like we did in row D, you can set it up and put your stitch markers ahead of time, or you can just count it out and check each time you go, every few sections to make sure you're on track. So I'm going to just chain up 1. Since we just did this row, we don't need that full height again. I guess maybe 2 is good. We'll do 2, chain 2. And we're just going to work our front post double crochets, and we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're going to do 2. We're going to increase by 1 stitch, which means we do 2 stitches into that stitch. So that's 1 and 2. All right, so, and one way you can tell that you're on track is your increases should always be on the second of your pairs, the second stitch of your pairs. It'll alternate between B and A. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to do 2 into that one. And you can see that that was the second stitch in our pair of color B, and the first increase was on the second stitch in our pair of color A. So then the next increase will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right here on that second stitch of color A again. So just work that row, and then I'll meet you back here for the next section, which will be section 6. I just finished row E, or round E, and your last stitch should be an increased stitch. If it's not, you missed somewhere along the way and you should go back and check. I'm going to join this to my first stitch with a slip stitch, and if you would like to count your stitches, you should be, if you're making the small, you should be at 168 stitches, and if you are making the large, you should be at 180 stitches. So now we are going to begin section 6, and we're going to start with color B, and just like whenever we start a section, we need to reverse our colors. So, and also again, we want to keep our inside seam along one line. Okay, this is our inside seam. And if you wear this in the reverse position, you'll just wear this in the back. So what we want to do is we want to bring the color B in this direction and the color A in this direction, which means we're just going to slip stitch 2 in this direction with color B and 2 in this direction with color A. So I'm going to do that actually right now. So color A, I'm just going to go over 2 stitches here. 1 and 2, and then I'll, wait, did I go the right way? Yes, I did. Okay. I'm going to just pull that loop up, and now I'm going to turn this around to do my slip stitches backwards. Sometimes the yarn gets caught on itself. All right, so that's 1 stitch there. There's 1 and 2. And I'm gonna go up 2, chain 2, and we can check that we're in the right place. This is color B, so we should be in line with the last row of color A, which we are. So we're ready to start right here. And I might need 1 more chain. Let me go ahead and do that. 1. So I did a total of 3 chains. 2 chains will still work, but I'm just going to do 3. I think it'll be work better. So I'm doing my front post and double crochet, and do a second front post double crochet, chain 2, just going to get my yarns untangled here, get this color A out of the way. Okay, so then I'm going to skip 2 stitches, 1, 2, and do front post double crochet in the next 2 stitches, and always watch out for the place where you have your increase, that you don't miss your one of those increase stitches. Chain 2, skip 2, front post double crochet, front post double crochet, and chain 2. So you're going to just work another section like we've worked the other sections. Right now we are on section 6, so you'll do 3 rows in section 6, and I will say it again that each row is comprised of 2 passes, first in color B, and then the second pass will be in color A. And you'll work 3 of those rows, and then I will meet you back here for our last increase row, or round F. Okay, so we're getting so close to being finished. I just finished section 6, the 3 rows of section 6, and now we are ready to begin round F. And let me just show you how it's looking so far. So excited. So for round F, if you're making the small, you're going to increase every 14 stitches by 1 stitch. And if you're making the large, you're going to increase every 9 stitches by 1 stitch. So I'll just take you through the first one, and again this is going to be in color A. This pink represents color A. And since the number is so large, if you want to count out your stitches ahead of time, you can do that and put stitch markers in, or you can just count as you go and do it that way. So we are chained up 2 here, and we're just going to start with a front post double crochet in the first stitch, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let me get some yarn here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and on the 14th one we're going to do 2 stitches, so that's an increase of 1 stitch. And I'm just going to do that all the way around, increasing 1 stitch every 14 stitches, or if you're making the large, you're going to increase 1 stitch every 9 stitches. So I'll meet you back at the beginning to join and show you starting the last section, section 7. If you are doing this, the 14, without putting stitch markers in, something to be aware of is that you're always going to be in a second stitch of a pair, and each time it's going to alternate. So the first time it was on a color A, and the second time it was on a color B. So if you're not on that pattern, you'll know that you're off. But again, it's always good to just do a second check of your counting, or if you like, you can count ahead of time and just put a stitch marker in each one that needs a double, a stitch increase. I'm here at the end of row F, and I'm going to join with a slip stitch to the first front post double crochet, and bear in mind that that last stitch should be an increased stitch. Okay, so now we're ready to start our last section, section 7, and we need to do the same thing that we did before, which is we want to move our color A and color B, we want to switch them. Okay, so we're going to slip stitch back 2 stitches with color B, and we're going, or forward actually, forward, and then we're going to slip backward 2 stitches with color A. So let me do that one first. Okay, so slip stitching backwards 2 stitches with color A, I go into that first stitch and slip stitch, go into the next one, slip stitch, and I'm just going to chain up 4 like I usually do, pull through that loop so that to hold my place. And now I'm going to take the color B, and color B I'm going to slip stitch forward. So bring it down to that first loop, And I'm just going to come forward 2 stitches. So this is the stitch that I'm already in. I'm going to go into the next one here. And do a slip stitch. And then I'm going to come across to the next stitch here and do a slip stitch in there. And I'm going to chain up 1, 2, 3. Let's see here. Yeah, so 3 looks good there. And I'm just going to get my color A out of the way here. All right, now we're ready to begin the last section. So we're just going to do 3 rows, just like we did in every other section. And your color should be lining up with the opposite color from the previous section. So this here is color A. This is color B on my hook. So I am in the right place. I'm going to do my first front post double crochet and then another one, chain 2, skip 2 stitches, front post double crochet, chain 2, skip 2 stitches, 1, 2, and so on. So and then when you're done with this round, you know how to complete it. I will meet you at the last round, round G, when section 7 is completed. I'm at the end of the first pass of the first row in section 7. I just want to show you what it looks like. So I just did my last 2 front post double crochets, and then you can see there's that increased stitch that's going to be reserved for the color A when we do the second pass of this row. I've done my chain 2, and I'm just going to join with a slip stitch here in the first stitch and chain up 4 to hold my yarn, to hold my place. And now I'm ready to start with color B, and that is going to begin on these 2 stitches here that are increased stitches. So just wanted to show you that. I'm just going to take out a couple of these chains here. So I've chained up 2, and now I'm ready to begin my second pass of the first row of section 7 with a front post double crochet, and then another one, chain 2, come in front of the work as always, and go over to the next 2 stitches to do more front post double crochets. And what you'll find is, at least for me, when I'm working with this pattern, as it grows, I kind of end up working with it a little bit kind of sideways. I find it easier to get into the stitches. All right, so I will meet you back here when the whole of section 7 is completed and we're going to do round G and Okay, so I'll see you there. Okay, so this is so exciting. I just finished section 7 and we're ready to do row G. For row G, it's going to be worked again in color A, and we are going to work every stitch around in our color A. So I'm going to start you off here, but I just wanted to say stay tuned for the end of the video where I'm going to show you the finished version, this one, and then I will have several pictures of several different versions that I've made at the end. So stay tuned at the end for that. And if you've liked this video so far, please consider giving it a thumbs up. It's a small way that you can help me, and I really appreciate that. So thank you, and let's get started on this last row here. So you can chain up 2, or you could probably even get away with chaining up just 1. It's not going to make a huge difference either way. But we're just going to go around in each stitch and front post double crochet. Also at the end, I'm going to give you some other ideas that I have about things that you could do with this pattern, how you might want to use it and expand on it. So just go ahead and go around and finish up row G. And I'll meet you at the end. Okay, are you ready for the big reveal? Here we go. It is finished, and look at that in all its glory. Isn't that just mesmerizing, those colors and the pattern? So the Inspira Crochet Cowl is now completed. Please stay through watching to the end. I'm going to model this for you so you can see what it looks like on. And also there will be some pictures at the end. Again, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe. And just wanted to give you a couple of final notes. One is that for the small, I used just a little bit over 1 skein of color A in the Ferris wheel, and less than 1 skein of color B in the Ferris wheel yarn, the Lion brand Ferris wheel yarn. For the large, you will probably need just a little bit more than 2 skeins of color A, and probably not more than 2 skeins for color B for the large. The other thing I wanted to suggest to you, and I'll show you this more when I model it outside, is this would make a great beginning yoke for a sweater. And I think a great yarn, if you're using the Ferris wheel yarns, a great yarn that you could use afterwards would be the Lion brand Wool Ease in their worsted weight. And I might make a video on that because I think I might take this and turn it into a sweater. So basically what you would do is, and let me give you the measurements too. Along the top, this is about 22 inches in circumference, and along the bottom edge, this is the small, is about 46 inches in circumference. From top to bottom is 11 inches. So to make this into a sweater, what you would do is you would take your yoke and you would keep working. You'd start working your arms at a certain, you keep going to a certain point where you get to your armpits, say here and here. This would be the wool ease. And when you get to a certain point here and here, you're going to connect, you'll connect the front and the back. And from here, you'll start working your sleeve on one side, and then you'll work your sleeve in the round on the other side, and then down the front, you can work in the round going down. Or yeah, that's probably the easiest way to do it. And if I do that, I'll probably make a video on how I do it. It would be kind of like a recipe for you to figure out how many stitches to make exactly for your own body. All right, so let's just quickly flip over to showing you what this looks like on. Okay, this little section here is only if you want to modify this pattern in some way. I just wanted to give you 3 different things to think about. One is you could make it smaller. You could make it so that it's just a cylinder, you know, just say 5 inches tall. Another modification you could make is you could make it much longer than what I have. So it's about how long I've made it, but you could make it even longer. This last row might be wide enough for you to just continue down without any more increases. That might be big enough for like a poncho or a cape. But if you do need to make more increase rows, what you'll need to do is your increase rows will need to be in multiples of 4. And I'll teach you about that in the next option. So the next option is, let's say you wanted to work this in a thinner or thicker yarn. If you do work this pattern in a thicker yarn, it's going to be a very thick cowl, because this is when you work in this stitch, it makes a very thick fabric. So if you're going to do this in a thick yarn, just be aware that it's going to be really thick. And if that's what you want, great. If that's not what you want, then just use worsted weight yarn as this pattern prescribes. But if you wanted to use, let's say you wanted to use a thinner yarn, you will need to calculate all of your numbers. So you will need to calculate the starting chain amount, and it needs to be a multiple of 4. So 4, 8, 16, 20, 24, so on. It needs to be divisible by the number 4. Then you will need to calculate, you'll need to figure out your increase rows. So the way this pattern is currently, you work, let's see, you work 1, 2, 3 sections before you have your first increase. So A, B, and row C is where we start your increases. So you'll need to calculate how many stitches to increase by. So let me give you, and you will need to do that for each of the other increase rows as well. And let me show you how to do that. So let's say you're working with a number 2 or 3 weight yarn, and you determine that you want the circumference of your cowl to be a certain amount, and that turns out to be a beginning chain of 160 stitches. Okay, So that's your A and B. Then when you get to row C, you want to do an increase. And so what you'll need to do is you'll need to find an increase that will give you a final stitch count that's divisible by 4. So let's use 160 as an example. So let's say we wanted to see if increasing by 2 stitches, by increasing 1 stitch every 2 stitches will work for us. So let's look to see if increasing every 2 stitches works. So what that will mean is that if we increase every 2 stitches, that means we're going to be increasing by half of the amount of our initial chains. 160 divided by 2. That's going to give us 80 stitches. We're then going to take the 80 stitches and add it to the 160. And we are going to get 240. Now to check if this is 240 stitches at the end of row C. To see if this works, we need to take 240 and see if it's divisible evenly by 4. And 240 divided by 4 is 60, so that checks out. I did the math also for the number 3. Let's say we wanted to see if we would increase every 3 stitches. You would take 160 divided by 3, and that doesn't work because we don't get a whole number. So let's try could we increase every 4 stitches by 1 stitch. So we would take 160, our starting chain amount, divide it by 4, and we get the number of stitches that we will be increasing by, 40. We take the 40 and we're going to add it to our original 160. 160 plus 40 equals 200. So now we're going to check and see if this 200 number is divisible by 4. 200 divided by 4 is 50, and that's a whole number, so it checks out, and we could, our row C could be an increase of 4 stitches, increase of 1 stitch every 4 stitches. And then what you'll need to do is you will need to, you can also go based on your gauge. So you'll know that, let's say you began with 160 stitches, and let's say that your circumference was 20 inches. And if you increase every 2 stitches, let's say this is A, B, and C, you're increasing by 80 stitches. That means you're going to be increasing by how many inches? If 160 stitches equals 20 inches, then 80 stitches is going to equal what? Half of that, 10 inches. So that means that at the end of row C, you would have a circumference of 30 inches. And if that's what you want, great. Let's see how that compares to what I have at the end of row C. For the small, I have 28 inches. So 30 inches is in the ballpark. It's about the same ratio. That's if you increased every 2 stitches. If you were increasing every 4 stitches, you're adding 60 stitches. So to find out how much this would increase, we will take 160 and divide it by 60. And we're going to get, let's see, 2. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, so sorry about that math there. What we need to do is we need to figure out what percentage 60 stitches is of 160 stitches. Okay, so if we know 160 stitches equals 20 inches, we want to know how much we're adding when we increase by 1 every 4 stitches. So what we do is we take 60 and we divide it by 160. And we find out that that's 37.5%. So we're going to take that. That means that when we increase by 60 stitches, we're going to be increasing the diameter by 37.5%. So we multiply that by 20 inches, our original circumference, and we get 7.5 inches. So then we're going to add that 7.5 inches to 20. We get 27.5 inches, and that will be our new circumference. So depending on, if you're doing 2 stitches, it's going to come out like this. And if you do every 4 stitches, it's going to be a little bit less dramatic. So, and that choice will just be up to you, whether how fast you want it to come out. So the faster you want it to come out, increase more frequently. So more towards the 2 stitches. If you want it to increase more gradually, then you'll increase you'll increase every 4 stitches or more. So that's how you would modify for a thinner yarn, and you would need to do that for each of the increase rows in your cowl. So if you're going to work with the thinner yarn, but at least if you do want to do that, now you know how to do it. And you can see how much work went into figuring this one out to begin with. Lots of trial and error. Okay. Another modification that you could make is you could make the neck portion of your cowl shorter. And to do that, what you could do is you could work 2 sections before your first increase instead of 3, and essentially skip section 3 and row B. So the way the pattern works is the stitch count stays the same for the first 3 sections. If you wanted the neck portion to be shorter, you could skip this 3rd section here, or I guess you could consider it skipping the 1st section, but you would just work 2 sections before working your increase rows. Then one other modification you could make to this pattern is, let's say you wanted it to be just slightly larger, and maybe you want it to have a little bit, because it's It's very thick. It's not terribly stiff, but it's definitely thick. Let's say you wanted it to be a little looser, have a little, just a tiny bit more drape to it. You could work it in a larger hook with the same worsted weight yarn, and your measurements will just be slightly larger. So for this pattern, instead of the 6.0 millimeter hook, you could use a 6.5 millimeter or a 7 millimeter with the worsted weight yarn, with a number 4 weight yarn. And that will give you just a slightly larger cowl without having to do more stitches. So that's just another modification you could try. And you could, you could make a small swatch to see. You could make like a mini version one, like a little mini tube to get your gauge and see if that's, that feel is going to work for you. Hi, so here is the Inspira Crochet Cowl completed. And I just wanted to show you how you might want to turn this into a sweater. So as I described to you just before, you would continue coming out. You'd probably do another increase row until you get to about here, about this level here, at which point you would connect it underneath and start working in the round for the arm, and also the same on the other side, working in the round on the arm. And then for the body, you would start working in the round. So you would need to do some more increases, but I would just work it in just double crochet. I wouldn't work anymore in this pattern because this is a quite thick fabric. You could do it. You could continue to work in this pattern and just maintain your stitch count to be multiples of 4. So that could be a nice little challenge if you want to make it completely like this. But to make it really easy, I would just start working in double crochet right on the last row, and you no longer need to worry about your multiples. So you could just increase at regular intervals, but you won't have to worry about your stitch count. So I hope you like this. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe, because we'll have another pattern out for you next week, or I will have another pattern for you out next week. And I really appreciate you joining along for this crochet fun here at the Crochet Magical Mystery Tour. Have a great week. See you next week.